We have an absolutely extraordinary panel here joining us today. So I'll give a quick introduction to each one of them, and then perhaps I'll ask each of you to introduce your companies or the companies you work with. So first to my left, we have Heather Bellini, who is President and Chief Financial Officer at InvestCloud, a global leader in financial software and digital wealth management solutions. She brings over 2 decades of experience in technology and financial services. Prior to InvestCloud, she served as CFO at a cybersecurity software firm, Deep Instinct, and spent nearly 10 years as a partner and managing director at Goldman Sachs, where she led the technology research group. Next to her is Francesca Carlesi, who's currently CEO of Revolut UK, a global financial technology leader offering a range of digital banking services through mobile app. She's a growth leader and entrepreneur with almost 20 years of experience in financial services. Before joining Revolut in December 23, she was CEO of Molo, the UK's first digital mortgage lender, a company which she founded in 2017 and grew successfully to exit in 2023. Next, we're delighted to have Vasant Prabhu, who is former Vice Chairman and Chief Financial Officer at Visa Inc. He has been CFO at several large US public companies, including NBC Universal, Starwood Hotels and Resorts, and Safeway. He's now a member of the board of directors at Delta Airlines and Intuit, among many other companies. And last but not least, we have Sunil Madhu, who's founder and CEO of Instant, a new AI for fraud loss insurance. He's a serial entrepreneur and technologist with several exits under his belt over the last 30 years. Prior to Instant, he was the founder and CEO of Socure, the $5 billion digital identity verification unicorn powering the top 5 US banks, the world's largest issuers, processors, and over 70% of all Fintech. So truly delighted to have you all here with us today. And as I said, perhaps we could start by asking each one of you to tell us a little bit either about your companies or the companies you work with, just so the audience can get to know you a little better for the discussion we're going to have later. So perhaps I'll start with you, Heather, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So as he mentioned, I'm the president and CFO of InvestCloud, which is a $400 million revenue company. We do front office, mid office, and back office technology for the wealth management industry. And prior to that, I spent a decade or so at Goldman Sachs running their technology research group and working on basically leading all their software IPOs during that time period. So have been around and seen a lot of growth stage companies over my time.
Yes, Francesca.
Oh, nice to meet you all. Great to be here. So I'm Francesca. I'm Italian originally, as you probably guessed by now. And I'm running Revolut in the UK. Now, Revolut is a global financial company, effectively started as a startup 9 years ago. And today we are in 45 countries. We have roughly 50 million customers across the globe and kind of roughly 1 billion of revenue size and growing 40% per annum. So I must say it's a fantastic company. I can claim merit for all of this because I just joined last year. But effectively, this is a company that is now, it's probably one of the few global leaders in fintech, born out of UK. I guess not many of you know Revolut yet, but we are looking to expand in the US.
Wonderful. Vasant.
I have a whole lot more to add.
Continue to us about Instant.
My startup, I can solve this problem for what time? Harder than that. Funnel? All businesses. Effective tools. Best efforts. Capital reserves. But really short. For lots of
Fantastic. So let's jump straight in. The theme of the conference, the theme of our panel is AI. And I think AI, I find, has sort of become almost a sort of catch-all term, right? Like it's replaced big data, used to be referring all these analytical techniques. Now we speak out of AI. I think it would be helpful to the audience to get a better idea of what AI actually means on the ground in fintech. To hear from each one of you, what is one application of AI, use of AI that you think has been most impactful? And it could be more modern Gen AI, it could be sort of the more old-fashioned predictive analytic AI. I'd be very curious to hear from each one of you. If you had to pick one use case to give us an idea of what AI really means in fintech, what would it be? And I'll let any of you start, or I can pick someone like we do in class.
Sure.
Sunil, please.
I think we've been using machine learning for a long time, and I'm old enough to have lived through the first AI bubble of the 1980s. So we use AI to solve an intractable problem traditionally. Underwriting insurance, underwriting different types of risk is a problem that we're applying machine learning and AI to help us solve this issue of managing fraud losses. We are in a regulated industry, as are the rest of my colleagues here. So unlike generating fun videos and pictures and text that we think is truthful, AI in our applications have to withstand model governance requirements, which means they cannot be black boxes where the outputs are not explainable, which applies to the majority of deep learning projects in the world today. So we have to use different mechanisms to be able to positively state that the outcome is not biased in any kind of way. Most people who are as old as I am remember that there's a problem called redlining in the United States, where banks used to make zip codes racist by not giving mortgages to people who weren't white in certain neighborhoods. And that has endemic effects in American society today. So that is a very serious problem, and biases can creep in even without you expecting it because of kind of the way we deal with descriptions of things in the world today. So there's a lot more rigor that's applied in AI in our space. That's not to say that we're not using the newer technologies. Generative adversarial networks, for example, are used by our company to train machines to figure out if an identity is real or fake, or if someone's trying to hack into our system, and we want to simulate that. So there are applications for all of this new generative stuff that we're seeing on the internet beyond just textual. And a lot of people may not realize, but generative networks are very at tasks that require automation because they're not fault tolerant. They hallucinate, they can lie to you, and that's just the problem in text generation. These systems have to be fault tolerant to be able to work in our environments, and we're not there yet.
Okay, that's super interesting. And I really want to talk about those challenges later. But it sounds like then you were talking about identity verification as kind of a big use case where you're using AI to try and figure out, is the person using the website actually who they say they are?
Or try to create an AI that spoofs fraudsters, make up a fake person and try to get through the system.
Vasant, can I,
Yeah, in the context of the business I used to be in, I mean, there are three places I'd be very comfortable allocating capital to today. One is fraud and identity. Two would be cybersecurity. Three would be productivity in the technology organization. Having said that, why would one do that? Because the benefits are sizable. So there's a high ROI if you can do it. Just saying that you would allocate capital there doesn't mean that there are solutions that are delivering, which is a whole different topic in itself. Separating hype from reality in AI is very important right now.
Absolutely. And but I guess what I'm trying to get to is you're telling us areas you'd be interested in. That's your wish list in some sense.
Yeah, that's where you go first, right? Thinking there's a lot of bang for the buck if it works.
If it works. But are there any places you've actually seen it work, like a practical one example of somewhere where it's actually had an impact?
Well, I think this is where, it's a longer conversation around, in every business context I'm involved in now, I try to really understand what are they really doing. And once you get past the bluster, not a lot.
Okay.
I think, AI is supposed to take the emotion out of decision making. It's very important that decision makers take the emotion out of their AI decision making right now, because there's too much of it that's driven by FOMO, as in fear of missing out, or fear of disruption, or just fear of the unknown, I think this calls for some pretty hard-headed decision making because there's going to be a lot of capital wasted.
Okay, I think that's a super fascinating perspective. Thank you. Francesca.
Well, I do echo some of the comments here because, we need to differentiate between the hype and reality. I think in our case, I must say that the old kind of a bit more boring but relevant topic of fraud detection, transaction monitoring, and effective spotting issues that can only be spotted to processing billions or actually millions of data. That's probably our main application right now of not really generative AI, but machine learning, which is kind of a probably we should go into definitions of that. That's probably the number one thing where we have been using AI at Revolut since not just since the last 6 months, right? Since the last few years.
Sure.
And it works on that. It works, it helps a lot. I think I must say, it's fair to say there's a lot of calibration to be done. I don't think we have it yet. Nobody's probably reached perfection. But the truth is, mandatory. I don't see any other option looking at the future in which you don't use AI to fight fraud, transaction monitoring, ML, and all of that. The reason for that is because what we see is that frauds and criminals are actually the biggest innovators. They're the first one to always pick up new technologies. So if you need to fight that, you need to keep at pace with what's happening. And that's, for us, is working very well, knowing that there's always room for improvement. I mean, the other side I would mention is customer interaction, customer service. I mean, that was the first probably use case in terms of chatbots, for example. First use case has become very popular, everybody talks about, but in truth, we haven't seen it yet working fully. So we do adopt it, we do have our own chat box. I must say that's not yet there. It's not yet there in terms of effectiveness with customers. And I think it's really interesting to see why, right? Partially it's because of this, still not yet 100% as a human, but it will be. But also there is a lot of consumer trust that needs to be overcome. So for example, we have a AI which is called Rita. And when people after
Rita, I love the names people come up with these AIs.
Yeah.
Rita.
Well, actually it's an acronym. It's actually really interesting. But anyway, it's like Lisa, right? What's the job? But anyway, but we see the customer after at some point, a lot of them at some point say, well, I want to talk to a human. So there is a little bit of a trust rate, a bridge of trust needs to be built. But definitely I cannot see in 5 years from now why people don't need to have call center except for very high value added things.
Yeah.
So but these are the two biggest use cases right now.
One fascinating thing that comes to mind in what you said is the fact that, you talk about fraud analytics. It's so interesting that the way you spoke about it, it was, well, yes, we use it for fraud analytics, but part of the reason almost is because the AI is causing the problem, not just the solution. Like we need the AI to be the solution because the AI is causing the problem with all these people using AI to create fraud.
Yeah, well, I would say it's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem, right?
Right.
Because we were using machine learning and AI much before this whole Gen AI kind of moving away. And it worked very well. It was very effective. I think what we're finding now that we are kind of on the back foot and we need to continuously improve.
Yep.
And so like maybe 5 years ago, this was a choice to decide to use AI, and then probably people that did and the companies that did were the most advanced in the market. Today, I don't think it's a choice anymore. It's just kind of you have to, and in fact, you need to keep up with it. But in fact, it would be very interesting to compare notes for experiences.
Heather, what about investment?
Yeah, we're using it in a variety of areas. So we're using it in R&D for QA. We've seen significant improvements in testing as a result of that, and in terms of like fixing bugs earlier in the process.
As you're saying, testing the software itself.
Testing the software, so QA of the software. So we use it there, and the thing is you can constantly QA because it's kind of always running. So that's great, and it leads to better customer satisfaction, and so there's a lot of benefits you can have from that. We're also using it to. It's had a significant improvement in developer productivity. We've had about a 30% improvement in developer productivity using some of the different co-pilots. So that's been very helpful for us. And just the way we, are putting Scrum teams together, right, and who they're working with. So we get kind of different skill sets there that we think has been very advantageous. So we're using it on that side. We're also using it, so part of our business is front-end software for the wealth managers themselves. So incorporating next best action. So it's all about how do you make advisors more effective and efficient, and how do you make the customer experience better. And so we've been and started to embed AI into our software to make it smart, if you will, so we can enhance that experience for the end user, whether it's the customer or whether it's the advisor. So we're kind of using it in the back end in terms of building the products and then making testing better, letting the customers benefit, again, whether it's an advisor or whether it's an end user, to make them more effective. And then, we're starting to use it in accounting, for example, as well, for some of the things like basically taking RPA to the next level.
I see.
So
very interesting. And the next best action use case you talk about, that's something presumably, people have been doing next best action use cases for 5, 10 years, et cetera.
Yeah, this is just taking it to another level.
Next level.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
That's fascinating. One thing that, I really like, and I really want to bring out two things actually that come to mind from your responses. The first one is just I think, distinction between, and a few of you touched on this, between sort of machine learning and what
Yep.
one might call traditional AI, and then the sort of new generative AI,
Right.
Where machine learning is more looking at a bunch of tabular data, using that tabular data to try to predict very specific things like, is this transaction fraudulent? What is the next best action for this customer? And then the Gen AI that is more the chatbots that are going to generate things.
Yep.
So in preparation for today, I actually emailed I think there's shockingly 4,000 students who've taken my advanced AI elective, and some of them are in the room, I think, some ex-students. I emailed all of them. I was like, hey, are any of you using Gen AI for anything? Every response I received, every single one was, oh, well, we have a chatbot. Everyone gets ChatGPT. We've trained a chatbot on our company's data. And so I guess the first thing I want to get to, and a few of you touched on this, which I found fascinating. Sunil with these adversarial networks, and Heather also on sort of taking next best action to the next level. I'm curious to narrow down on, other than chatbots, if we leave those aside, where has a Gen AI been useful / has it really anywhere? What are some specific areas where people have found they've really been impactful?
Medical industry. So an interesting study that was conducted recently comparing the machine's ability to look at medical images of people with cancer, predict if there was cancer or not. And they had doctors look at the same images, and they had the machines look at the same images. And the machines were very accurate, more accurate than the people. And they did another test where they told the doctors what the machine's outcome was to see if that would change the doctor's answers. And it turns out the doctors performed worse with the machine feedback.
Okay.
So that tells you that human arrogance is the problem. If you take the human being out of the loop entirely and just let the machine do its job, because it's a pattern recognition, and you'll tend to have better outcomes than actually complementing human beings, as it turns out.
So I think that does make sense, and that's, I guess, great for all of us, sort of better reading medical scans. But I guess, arguably something like that, you could even say is almost an academic setting, right? Medicine and reading scans is a very, very regimented, specific. It's not the dirty world of business, dirty world of fintech, all kinds of things happen. I'm curious if there's any, and maybe, I don't know if any of you are comfortable, perhaps Heather, you were talking about this next best action sort of use case. Is it a question of using some more of that Gen AI specifically, or?
Yeah, we would say yes.
Yeah.
Taking next best action.
Kathleen, can we check the mic might be out?
Taking what we used to do and getting generative AI. That's our R&D roadmap.
There's some challenges in that respect itself. See, when you use automation, every step, if you look at the purpose of AI, it's to produce knowledge. It's to consume a lot of information, produce knowledge. In order to do automation, you have to take steps, specific actions, right? Next best step. If the robot hallucinates, or makes some stuff up, that has downstream domino effects on the decisions that are going to follow. this is the challenge. And thus far, I don't see anyone who's
Interesting. So
I mean, I'd make a distinction that, people often naturally jump to AI, machine makes decision, right? As opposed to AI, machine enhances a decision a human makes. I think the bridge between using AI to improve decision making by actual humans is one that's going to be far more effective in the short run. The chasm between going from, machine helps the human make a better decision to let the machine make the decision, that's a pretty big one.
Yeah.
I see the first thing happening a lot. I'll give you
we
an
used to
example.
call that expert systems back in the 80s.
Yeah, exactly. Like I see this happening in a lot of business contexts I'm involved in, where the CEO has figured out how to stay on top of his business in ways he couldn't do before. There's a founder of a business I know who has an app that he regularly goes to that looks at all the email traffic in his company and all the calls coming in, and he can ask a simple question saying, customer X, how's it going? And he gets a response that has analyzed all the internal email traffic and all the external communications and gives him a perspective on what's going on with customer X. Now, does he then make a decision saying, oh my God, I should just do that? No, it's another input. I see a lot of CEOs and C-level executives starting to say, hey, instead of sitting in a room with 6 of my people and asking 10 questions, I now have a way where I can, stay on top of what's going on. It's an interesting use case that, I haven't heard talked about much, but I see actually being used.
And Heather, you wanted to...
No, I would agree with.
No, I agree. It's really that's the message.
Yeah.
No, I think almost I had the opposite experience. No company. So that's what we spot in the tech. All that. What I'm finding that not there yet in terms of subsidy. What point that in our case we need this is a high reliance of what's happening at in a culture where people do rely and stop it and say, okay, this is it about it or what. So probably not there. I don't know whether we'll ever get food.
Yeah, I agree.
That's a real.
Okay.
We don't need to rush. I think there's a lot of potential.
What I'm hearing almost, and tell me if I'm characterizing this right, is that there's a reason that the majority of these applications are chatbots, is because in some sense a chatbot is the best way to communicate with a human. And at the end of the day, the human's going to be making the decision. And so it seems
But
to be...
I think it's an evolution too. It's right. Like there's a pendulum on one side. Other side, it's just making all the decisions. Probably going to be somewhere in the middle. Just application working on. Yeah,
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, identity, and you've dealt with it a lot, is a fascinating topic. And as it relates to fintech, extremely important, right? Because a lot of what fintech involves is protection of assets, transfer of assets. So identity is vital. And you may know this, there's been many declarations that the identity problem has been solved, and it never has. The AI discussion sounds a lot like
solved by
that.
Sunil, no? Haven't we?
Right, exactly. I've heard it.
in the startup, it'll be solved.
Yeah, I've heard it numerous times by various people saying, I have solved this problem. And AI sounds a lot like that, right? Where people are saying, it's going to solve all our problems. And what has become apparent over the years in identity, and maybe someday it'll be different, is it's use case specific. So you really have to look at, does it solve this use case? If I take the business I was in, which is payments, if you're going to do fraud, you have to meet a few criteria. You have to be able to do it in milliseconds, right? That's how long it takes for a transaction to be done. If you can't do it in milliseconds, it doesn't matter. So you have to think about, and then of course there's the cost element. You have to do it in milliseconds for millicents. Okay, can you do that? And you have to do it better than whatever was doing it. and you have to do it, in a reliable way because money is at stake, and you can't hallucinate at important times.
Fraudsters don't have any constraints. They don't have any costs. They can. The good guys are the ones that have these problems. Fraud's economically in the favor of the fraudsters, so you have to kind of economically change the problem. I think they disincentivize it, but it's very hard to get rid of it. That's why it's normal. But you're right. I mean, these things are kind of identity, as an example, is foundational to a lot of problems. And machines are being used, have been used for the last several decades, learn about our behaviors and how we are, because we follow patterns all the time. And that's actually used a lot, and those signals are used as inputs in fighting fraud. Right.
Well, one thing that comes to mind, Vasant, when you mentioned this, Amanda Stent from Bloomberg in one of the earlier panels said something that really, I think, resonated with me because I've seen it quite often. She mentioned that, with AI, it is so easy to build a prototype, to build something that you build it up and you're like, oh my God, this is amazing, it's going to solve all my problems. And then suddenly you realize, well, guess what? It's going to cost me, $4 million a year in just sort of, API fees. It's going to be too slow. It's going to be this, it's going to be that. Do you all resonate with that idea, the fact that it's easy to build a sort of, nice looking thing that seems like it's going to be great, but then in practice, that sort of last 30% or last 20% is really hard to get to?
But I think it's also part of this journey. But
Yeah. It looks like we're losing mics one by one. They're dropping like fleas.
All right, so, it does feel different now. I get the feeling. Okay, so no, I would say yes, absolutely. I think we see in many applications, and even in my previous company, because we are a startup, so we did have a lot of money, so we started doing things, kind of experimenting, doing pilot, and doing the prototype now is so much easier than even a few years ago, because also online you find anything, so you can build a chat box quite quickly, you can build even a quick detector for something. The problem is using it for real on a large scale is very
How do you handle that as a leader? I'm sure everyone, I want to get to you in a second, Heather. How do you handle that as, you're leading this company? You probably have like people left, right, and center coming to you with like, look how cool this is, look how great this is. How do you deal with this? It must be really difficult.
Okay, maybe share my thoughts, but I think that's probably where there are probably very divergent views right now in the industry, and we'll settle, right? So I think that's probably the biggest dilemma right now. What do you do as a leader in a company where you typically have 10,000 things to do anyway as a BAU? So the team needs to stay focused, but then you see that there is a whole new wave of innovation and it's coming, and you cannot afford not to be on it. So, but you cannot just drop everything else. So, I don't know. My personal view is that you need to be careful not to stop at every shiny object that's out there. That's really dangerous. It's particularly dangerous, I think, if you're in a more resource constraint, like in a startup. So in that environment, I'll be very careful. Pick one thing, allocate a team, ring fence it, but let everybody stay focused on everything else, right?
Interesting.
That's one approach, which for me is about prioritization, focus. Don't lose the opportunity to experiment. You must do it, but don't lose, just don't try everything that's out there and ring fencing the company. I must say there's another aspect of this, which is where I see some companies going, Microsoft is going that direction, driven by Satya Nadella, which is if you don't drive it top down, kind of force it in a way, right? So if you think about productivity enhancement, I think productivity enhancement is one of the probably biggest opportunities of AI, but it's one of the most difficult, in my experience, to embrace, because you need to disrupt existing processes. You need to tell people, okay, compliance or even development, you're doing things this way. As of tomorrow, the only way to get there is to kind of force people to say, well, now you need to embrace this AI, right? We're not going to hire new people.
Yeah.
That's one way, right? You say, well, we're not going to hire new people. You better get the productivity, and then you force it. I think you need to judge for your company what works. That's my 2 cents so far.
And Heather, apologies, you were going to.
Yeah, no, I agree. The internal processes, that's probably the biggest resistance to change is because, like she was saying, you can drive a lot of efficiency and therefore fund a lot of these new shiny
Right.
objects, if you will. So we're trying to drive that from the top down, because otherwise it's not going to work. But it does take time. But I think there's a lot of productivity enhancement that is starting to happen, and that I think we're just beginning to see it, at least kind of where we are. And then from an R&D perspective, I mean, we can fund more things now because we can take our testing team down from 70 people across 3 different businesses down to 25 people, and you can take that headcount and kind of put it into building new product. The developers are more efficient, so you probably don't have to hire as many to build, to get more product or more new features or whatever we're looking to solve for out of that group of the existing pool. So I think for us, in terms of people come with new ideas, we were actually sat in a day-long meeting yesterday where the leaders were coming through the different divisions, coming up with what they wanted for money next year in terms of different R&D priorities. And we make them come with a pretty detailed business plan, much like you would probably give an assignment to people in business school that I remember doing. And they would, we would have trying to put those costs in and then try and figure out whether we could do it more effectively if we leveraged more, AI tools or whatever, just different productivity tools. But I mean, it's a challenge, but it's kind of a good challenge because people are coming to you with new ideas. So, and then it's a matter of whether you can build a big enough market around it. So I remember the days at Microsoft when they would say, they would give their developers time to go work on new projects. And they would say, people would come in and say, I'm building this, I need $10 million to build this product. And they would say, well, what's the market opportunity? And they would say 15 million. And they're like, well, we're not giving you 10, right? So they added that element because early days, like before Microsoft got more focused on cost, kind of in the early 2000s, they would let people just run with those ideas without thinking about what the potential return would be on that investment. And then they change. So.
Vasant, you've seen, I mean, a broad range of companies going through these challenges right now. What are the sort of the best and worst that you've seen?
No, I think, as you said, it all starts, a lot of what passes for AI projects now is prototyping, right? People are creating the prototype. And you have to do what you would do in any product creation, right? Once you have a prototype, you have to figure out commercial viability. And just because you have a working prototype doesn't mean it's going to be commercially viable. That's when all the tough questions have to be asked. And that's not when you want your head of AI to be making the decision, because there's a lot of, emotion and self-interest. There's a lot of vendors out there who want to sell you stuff. And so you just have to be hard-headed about, is this going to be commercially viable? You also have to make decisions on, where am I willing to be on the bleeding edge, and where am I willing to wait and be a fast follower? And those are, like, for example, in the business I was in, I'd be fine being on the bleeding edge on fraud and identity. I'd be fine being on the bleeding edge on cybersecurity, because the company I worked for was on the bleeding edge with the older technologies and needs to be with the newer technologies. But on some other things, don't need to be, And so you really have to be very thoughtful about this, because the other thing about AI is that it's capital intensive. So it's not cheap.
Right.
It's not like you throw up a website and let's see if it works kind of thing. So you really need good business people in the mix. And right now, especially so, because there's, you turn on CNBC and everybody's an expert, and you've got all these vendors who have their own bottom lines that they're protecting, who are experts, and you need good, thoughtful business people in the mix right now.
So Neil, I'm curious, in your case, I mean, you are on the bleeding edge, right? What you're doing is very,
We're the Wild West. Now, I have a different view. I mean, it's kind of the same. Nothing has changed in product development just because it's AI. We still follow the same tried and tested mechanisms.
On the one hand, yes. On the other hand, I mean, it's more expensive now to experiment.
Technology is not changing every 2 years. It's changing every 6 months.
Precisely, right? Every 2 days. I mean,
I can run a full-blown LLM on my MacBook. I don't need billions of dollars of graphics processors from NVIDIA, et cetera. And also, newer mechanisms of AI algorithms are being created. Consider that all of the stuff that's happened in the last 15 years has predominantly been because of the simulation of a neuron by Google, and it's the most dumb simulation there is. If you actually consider how complicated a neuron actually is and all the layers of cells and bidirectional communication, we have the most simplest emulation of it. But that one thing has really, it's used matrix mathematics, which makes graphics processors great for it, etc. But there are entire projects now that are dedicated at software-based solutions that do not need GPUs, that do not need vector maths. So, I think it's possible because the cost factor and the technology is changing so fast.
But I guess my question for you is, suppose someone came up with something like that,
Yeah.
right? And you now had the opportunity, a new paper comes out of, great university, tells you can do this.
Yeah.
How do you decide, do I now spend the next 3 months really going after that latest cutting edge thing, or do I?
Yeah, so in our company, for example, we encourage lunches and learns with our employees. We encourage all of them to take AI and apply it in any which way they feel possible. We do not look at profitability, cost, and all of that stuff. We just want the ideas. Then we'll go through the process of productizing the ideas that seem interesting, like we would do with any other product. And you look at the pros and cons of it. You'll speak to customers. You'll get feedback. You'll do your market research, timing, etc. And then you'll figure out whether you need to bring that to market or not. That hasn't changed. But I think the pace of change requires ideation. And it's not like you have to, in large corporations, you need R&D budget because you need to go and use infrastructure and IT. But now the barrier to entry is your laptop and some time. So you could literally do these projects at home on a weekend if you want. And then if the problem you're solving makes sense to commercialize and there's profit to be made from that, then there's a whole process to get there, like any other product. But we do encourage people to play with the tools. We do not put restrictions on them saying, we don't have the budget for you to do R&D. That's yesterday's mode of operation.
Makes sense. I do want to get your advice to students, but before that, I have one question I've been dying to ask you, Heather. Wealth management, right? Very interpersonal process. It's a human process. A lot of wealth management is, human-to-human interaction, relationships. How do you see AI? Is it going to be able to replace some of that? Is it going to help that? Like, how does it play into that?
Most of the banks have pulled back on all of their robo practices.
Advisors.
You've seen a lot of them. I don't know if it's all of them, but a good deal of them have all been walked back. So money is a very personal thing. And so I don't know. I don't see it coming anytime soon or, in my time where that will be replaced. So, I do think it's something where for us, it's about making the advisors smarter, making them more effective. I mean, the average number of wealth managers have been at roughly 300,000 in the US forever. But assets, and if you look at kind of market assets, they keep going up. They're in obviously the hundreds of trillions of dollars at this point. So the question is and more people get exposure to the markets all the time. Alternatives are becoming a bigger part of people's portfolios. And if you believe Mark Rowan, it's going to go from 5% to 30%. And in privates, and maybe that's the case, and that's more complicated and it needs education. But our front-end facing software there is to make the advisor's job more effective, make them better at their job, how to surface the right information. So if they're looking at, if they know a client's been looking at research because they've been looking at EVs or they've been looking at GPUs or whatever, and they've been on the wealth manager's website and looking at the research, it might be able to clue in the advisor like, hey, this is what your people are doing. Maybe there's a new alternatives offering that's coming out from Apollo, and therefore you would want to reach out to your client when that subscription opens up. So it's a variety of things. It's like helping them understand how adding different elements to their portfolio might reduce risk, even though it might not trade every day, right? So thinking of like how semi-liquids can help reduce risk and potentially raise returns, especially in like your 401k, where you don't get the money for a long time or don't access the money for a long time. So there's things we're doing with that, but for us, it's really, we don't see it in the near term at all, even in the intermediate term, replacing advisors. But it's more about making them more effective and making the relationship they have with their end customer even more, I guess, special or personal than it's been in the past.
Makes a lot of sense. One last question I have to ask all of you before we turn it over to the audience. We have a lot of students in the room, perhaps people early in their career. What would each of your advice be for them in terms of getting most effective, getting prepared to be effective in this brave new world of AI? What should they be learning? What should they be doing? Maybe we'll go from Sunil sort of backwards towards me.
Bow to your robot leaders. No, I'm just kidding. Look at where you want to apply the technology. AI is nothing more than a tool. It's a screwdriver like any other. There's a lot of hype around it because we're all fascinated that a machine can make a sentence up or paint a painting or whatever, but we're the inspiration for it. It's based on our knowledge that these things are doing what they're doing. So don't lose sight of the fact that human beings come first. These are just screwdrivers for us.
I guess I'd spend a minute on the topic of this panel, which is fintech. I think there's an extraordinary amount of value creation in fintech coming. There's already a lot of value that's been created. Visa, MasterCard together are over $1 trillion in market cap. Sizable companies have been created. Of course, PayPal, Stripe, Square, Revolut, Adyen, and many more to come. So I think if you're thinking about a career, I think fintech is something, especially based in New York, is something that you should think about. What I have seen in the last decade I've been in it is people who come at it purely with a technology background underestimate the financial side of it, because financial services can be very subtle and very complex, and they often make big mistakes. Similarly, if you're coming strictly with the financial services side of it and you don't understand the technology, you really don't know how things can change. If you can start early and really marry the two, I think you can become very valuable. And I think there's a lot of money to be made in the world of fintech over the next 20 or 25 years.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe what I would say, maybe coming from a slightly different angle, I have two kids that are thinking what they do when they go to university. So I have to think about it, right? So what would I do? And I more and more probably think about. And I think I kind of boil it down to two things right now in terms of advice. Generally, one is, I think we're working towards a world more in general where kind of analytical skills, data, and also some coding, not to be the end game, but to be the tool, are going to be the common language. So for me, being able to navigate, understand, train, and it's kind of, it's like knowing English, I think almost. That's what I'm saying, right? So even if you work in strategy in the future, you do need to be able to, extract some data. You need to do it. So I think kind of scientific data analytics is a very good skill set to have, and then you can learn the finance and learn all of that. But if you do it early on, you have an edge compared to anybody else. And the other thing I would say is, and funny because the world is moving very fast, I think just learn how to learn, which I would say just you keep learning all the time. So embrace new things. ChatGPT is coming out. I see my 16-year-old son who does his homework. He does his homework, okay, so, but...
Sorry, everybody does their homework.
We won't tell anyone.
No, I won't tell anyone. It doesn't have any connection with it, but it's...
All the kids are training ChatGPT, so now ChatGPT can smart.
Correct. No, but for him, it was very natural. He said, well, if I ask something, he told me, like, it's much more effective than Google now. And so you need to have that open mind to embrace, experiment at any age. So now I started doing as well a bit, but it's okay. So, and that will be very key because the world moves fast, and you need to train yourself to be open-minded, curious, and keep learning. These are the two things.
Yeah, no, I would agree with everything they said. Be a lifelong learner because technology is changing so quickly. Yep. And be well-rounded, I think is kind of the moral of kind of what I'm hearing here, which I wholeheartedly agree with. In terms of, you're going to need your finance skills, you're going to need your strategy skills. So I think what you get, I'll plug Columbia for a second, what you get from an education here, I think is going to be really important, and just continuing to embrace change on the technology side.
Makes a lot of sense. All right, let's send it over to our audience. Are there any questions? I see a few hands.
Yeah, my question was sort of a follow-up from the first panel we had. I think we heard some perspectives from a number of the banking leaders whether or not AI was going to be this democratizing factor, something that makes it easier for fintechs to enter markets that maybe would have otherwise been difficult for them, or if the costs might be prohibitive in some cases, either human capital or compute power. Would love to hear this panel's perspectives, how they either mirror or are different from what we heard earlier.
I don't know. As a first reaction, my must step in is I would say that more than AI, but I think technology is and has been, and it will continue to be a democratizing factor. I think clearly AI is an accelerator. And the reason why I mention it is, for example, in financial services, used to be that, if you need to go to a bank and then you want to do some investment, you need to talk to somebody, only some people could have a private banker and things like that. And right now, or investing in crypto, right? Right now, you can, through technology, the barrier of entries are so low and so widespread. Anybody can invest in metals, in crypto, or some kind of advice, invest in stocks. So it's actually massive democratizing. I think it's driven by technology. I think AI will help with that. I'm not sure whether we're still there yet, but in general, I think that's the case. But it's more of a broader trend across technology. That's what I've seen.
And for the sake of time, is there anyone who disagrees, who thinks that?
Yeah.
No, I think I'm on the side that it will democratize more because, startups have the advantage of their risk takers and they're nimble. And there is a sufficiently large industry that will finance good ideas. So I don't think capital is going to stop them from doing things.
No, I agree.
Perfect.
Right here.
We have Mike.
Yes.
Go for it. Perfect.
So, Vasant, you had mentioned a critical point that happens in probably many boardrooms across corporates where you've had the hindsight of a multi-month long pilot, and it's usually, a Sunil as an outside vendor, or whether it's an internal product and you're evaluating it for its effectiveness. And you mentioned that it's very important to have the business people in the room to judge it on those merits. But are there any non-obvious things that you look at when understanding whether you go the next step from a pilot to fully implementing across the organization?
No, I don't think there's any magic to it, right? This is normal decision making that you may, and different companies are better or worse at it. I think there are times when you say you're willing to go within insufficient information because you should. And there are times when you say, I'll wait till I get better information. And those are the judgments you make always, which is why AI is always going to be somewhat limited, because maybe an AI model may wait for all the information to come in, whereas a human might say, that's enough, I'll take the risk. But that's that's everyday business.
Yes.
Thank you. This is wonderful. Something came out from the second panel conversation with Aaron that AI can help markets be more efficient or create new markets. And Sunil, it looks like from your description of what you're doing, you are creating markets by transferring fraud risk from a company to an insurance company.
To the insurance market, yeah.
Insurance market more generally. Can you tell us a little bit about how AI helps you do that? Like, what kind of issues does it solve?
No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I mean, it's the fundamentals of machine learning. So we use linear and nonlinear models to go study massive amounts of data in real time to be able to price the risk. So in order to create an insurance company, you have to make the problem insurable. So in my case, the kind of margin comes from being able to reduce the exposure to the losses or reshaping the loss curve. So really, it comes down to the difference between saying not all fraud is bad. I know it sounds controversial because you might be selling gold bars and you might be selling paper clips as two separate products. Fraud is normal. It's going to affect the sales of both. What do you care more about, the gold bar losses or the paper clip losses? Now, if 10 billion paper clips are lost, which amounts to the same as a gold bar, sure. But on average, you care about the gold bars. So there are ways you can actually eliminate risk by making judgments using machines in real time with a variety of signals. All of this is not possible without machine learning. Human beings can't do it. It's just too much happening, too fast. And so we're using machine learning to learn from past events and then take a future event that it's never seen and classify that as a risk or not. But from our perspective, the question is not whether there's fraud or not, more is the loss going to be very large or not? Right? So we're quantitatively reshaping the loss curve by determining whether loss is acceptable for us to take or not, and on that basis, underwriting the risk. So by using machines to make the problem an insurable problem, by being able to underwrite that risk at a premium that is lower than your loss, we now have the ability to transfer that risk to the insurance marketplace. There's a lot more to it than that, but this would not have been possible 10 years ago without the advancements in machine learning.
What are you doing for time? What? Great.
Hi, I'm Renee Lumley Hall, a former student of the business school. I'm actually really encouraged to hear that you all have such a strong appetite to experiment with the application of artificial intelligence in your respective businesses. What are some of the surprises you came across in some of the experimentation that you've done over the years?
Pattern recognition and the machine coming up with inferences that were non-intuitive to humans, counterintuitive even sometimes. That's a good example of the advantage of machine learning, because a human being sitting and looking at bits of information can't really see these kind of non-correlated patterns necessarily. So we've seen trends in fraud and behavior patterns in economic credit defaults that we would have not normally expected to see, but the machine has surfaced something.
Any example you can share, or are they all secret?
I don't generally, talk about specifics,
Sure.
but yeah, I mean, there are some macro trends that we actually see.
Rephrase, is there anything that people have been surprised by in terms of since they've started this journey towards AI?
I don't know if it's surprising, but it's parsing the hype from the reality is a lot of it. It's the vendors coming in and telling you what you could do, and then you have to calibrate that, right? Because they oversell it, and just trying to figure out what the real benefit might be. I would say one of the other things is, and you mentioned it before, it's when you're trying to drive internal change to adopt these applications and tool sets, it's the resistance to change. And so, trying to, what's surprising to me is when you could show people how much easier basic tasks would be that take us a long time and that we all might complain about. It might just be getting through your inbox, right? Or creating pivot tables or things like there are tools that will do that for you now. But people still are resistant to embracing it. And it's kind of gets to the point of when we said, what would our recommendations be? Be a lifelong learner and embracer of change and technology, because that's one of the things that's surprising to me. If you could give people tools to make their jobs easier so they could free up their time to do something more value added, they're still resistant. Not by everybody, but by a good portion of people. And
people are drawing the dotted line to where the future is going to lead.
Yeah.
Which is not good for people.
Well, see, I go back to, I'm a believer that, people thought that, we were going to, when you had the assembly line created, right? It's the same. You can go through all those different analogies when people are like, AI is going to take over the world. No, I just think what they're doing will change.
Well,
right?
I think society fundamentally is going to change, right?
Yes,
because as you said,
get retrained.
That's right. I mean,
But you have to embrace change to be retrained.
Absolutely, but people are afraid of change.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, we're living, the infrastructure we have is post-war. It was meant for rinse and repeat scale.
Yep.
AI is democratizing that. It's changing those models radically. So we're going to see some resistance and people are going to be scared because some people are definitely going to lose their jobs. But that's the future.
Yep.
Well, the future seems to be a great place, unless did you have a...
Well, I don't want to throw cold water on the debate we've been having.
No, please.
A possible surprise that I would be interested in is, I'm a contrarian by inclination, and everybody's looking this way. Share a mind, share a money. What are the opportunities they're missing that are not there? This is AI. There's a lot of opportunities in a lot of other places. I think there's plenty of opportunity in areas that people are now distracted by. And I wouldn't be surprised if some smart people will step in there. So I would be looking for, in every business, the things I'm not doing because I'm spending all this time thinking about AI.
Yep.
I think that's a very good point. Yeah, no, I think when it's also an investment thesis right now, it's about because of AI and data, all of this will grow. In the future, what will also grow is exactly the opposite. Because, and this is probably something that I was surprised about, it's not strictly about AI, but it's actually true because we are so immersed in social media that people will more and more want to go back to nature, to community, we'll have more time, right? So we'll do things that are kind of more old fashioned. So a lot of people early stage are starting to invest in community, entertainment, nature and all that, because we might, depending on, might swim back a bit, right? Right now we all value a very nice holiday in the middle of nowhere with no connection because we are reacting.
That's just us. Our kids don't value that. They want connection. They only need the internet. That's it. The rest of the needs triangle not required.
Yeah.
All right, so the conclusion of this panel is we are all moving to a cabin in the woods. Thank you all so much for joining us, truly. This is a wonderful conversation.